I did not understand, until much later, that the most dangerous losses do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with shouting, or broken doors, or dramatic endings that allow you to name the moment everything went wrong. They arrive quietly, disguised as responsibility, patience, and love. They arrive while you are busy doing what you believe is right. And one day, long after the damage is done, you look back and realize that the person you lost was not someone else. It was you. There is a particular kind of silence that settles at the end of a life you tried hard to protect. It is not peaceful. It is not empty. It is heavy, like air before a storm that never comes. You sit in familiar rooms surrounded by evidence of endurance, photographs, routines, shared histories, and yet none of it feels like proof of success. Only proof that time passed while you were standing still. I did not know in those final years that I was living inside the consequences of choices I had made slowly, carefully, and with the best intentions. If someone had asked me then whether I regretted my marriage, I would have said no without hesitation. Regret felt like a betrayal of effort. I believed deeply that commitment meant seeing things through, even when they hollowed you out. I did not know that love could survive while identity quietly starved. I did not know that you could save something for so long that you forget what you were saving it for. I grew up believing that stability was the highest form of success. In the neighborhood where I was raised, people admired those who endured. Men were respected not for their happiness, but for their ability to carry weight without complaint. My father embodied that ideal. He woke before sunrise, worked until his body ached, returned home silent but reliable. He was not cruel. He was not distant by choice. He simply believed that providing was the loudest form of love a man could offer. My mother, in her quiet strength, reinforced that belief. She endured alongside him, rarely asking for more, rarely admitting when she needed it. That was the model I inherited. Love meant staying. It meant sacrifice. It meant swallowing discomfort, because discomfort was temporary and responsibility was permanent. By the time I reached adulthood, those ideas were not beliefs anymore. They were instincts. When Amina entered my life, she did not disrupt those instincts. She fit neatly into them. She was composed, intelligent, and deeply practical. There was a calm authority in the way she spoke, a certainty that made decisions feel settled rather than debated. We were introduced through family connections, under the watchful eyes of people who believed compatibility mattered more than passion. Our early conversations were polite, cautious, respectful. There was no dramatic spark, but there was reassurance. And reassurance to me felt like the foundation of something lasting. Marriage followed the expected path. Ceremonies, blessings, advice from elders who spoke about patience as if it were the same thing as love. On our wedding day, I remember feeling not excitement, but responsibility. I remember promising myself that I would not fail at this, that I would be the kind of husband people could point to as an example, that I would protect the stability of this union at all costs. The early years were busy rather than romantic. We learned each other's routines, preferences, habits. We divided responsibilities without much discussion. Amina liked things done a certain way, and I adapted quickly. Adaptation felt natural to me. It felt mature. When small disagreements arose, I was usually the first to soften. Peace mattered more to me than being right. I believed that compromise was proof of love. When our first child was born, the house changed in ways I had expected and ways I had not. There was noise, exhaustion, and a new kind of fear that settled deep in my chest. I worked longer hours without resentment. Providing felt urgent now, necessary. Amina became more focused, more precise. Motherhood sharpened her sense of control. I admired her dedication even as I felt myself receding slightly from the center of the home. I told myself this was normal, that marriages shift when children arrive, that my role was to support, not to be supported. When I came home tired and found no space to speak about my day, I accepted it without question. When my opinions were met with indifference, I told myself they were not important. I did not notice how often my needs were the first thing to be postponed. Over time, small patterns formed. Amina corrected me often, not harshly, but consistently. How I handled money, how I spoke to relatives, how I interacted with the children. Each correction came with a justification, and each justification made sense. I adjusted again and again, believing that flexibility was strength. I did not realize that I was training myself to disappear. There were moments when I felt a quiet unease, usually late at night when the house was asleep. I would lie awake and feel a vague sense of absence, like something essential had been misplaced. I did not know how to name it. Naming it would have required acknowledging dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction felt like ingratitude. So I pushed the feeling aside and focused on effort. Years passed that way. The children grew. Responsibilities multiplied. Our routines became efficient, predictable. From the outside, our marriage looked stable. People admired us. They spoke about our calm household, our lack of public conflict. I accepted their praise with a practiced smile, never knowing how to explain that calm is not the same as closeness. Amina became more ambitious, more engaged with the world beyond our home. She spoke passionately about growth, independence, self-realization. I supported her fully. I rearranged my schedule to accommodate her commitments. I handled more at home so she could pursue more outside it. I believed that partnership meant making space for the other person's expansion. It did not occur to me to ask where my own expansion fit into that equation. Slowly, I stopped initiating conversations that were not practical. I learned which topics led to irritation and which led nowhere. I learned to anticipate her moods and adjust accordingly. This anticipation became second nature. It felt like attentiveness. It felt like love. But it required constant self-monitoring, constant restraint. I was always one step ahead, preventing discomfort before it could surface. The cost of that vigilance revealed itself in subtle ways. I laughed less freely. I shared less about my inner life. When something good happened to me, I often kept it to myself. When something painful happened, I dealt with it privately. I did not want to disrupt the balance I had worked so hard to maintain. There were arguments, but they were controlled, almost restrained. Amina would express disappointment. I would apologize, even when I did not fully understand the accusation. The apology restored peace. Peace became my goal, not resolution. Over time, the apologies lost their specificity. They became a reflex, a way to end discomfort quickly. I did not realize that each one carried a small surrender. I began to measure my worth by how little trouble I caused. If the house was quiet, I felt successful. If Amina seemed distant, I assumed I had failed. I believed that love required vigilance, that neglect would invite collapse. I did not see that the vigilance itself was eroding me. There were days when I felt strangely detached from my own life, as if I were performing a role rather than inhabiting it. I fulfilled obligations automatically. I smiled when expected. I spoke when necessary. Inside, there was a growing numbness that I mistook for maturity. Still, I did not consider myself unhappy. Unhappiness felt too dramatic, too self-indulgent. I believed that adulthood was supposed to feel like this, restrained, serious, focused on duty. I believed that wanting more was a sign of immaturity. Looking back now, I understand that this was the beginning of my disappearance, not because anyone forced it, but because I offered it willingly. Piece by piece, adjustment by adjustment, all in the name of saving something I believed was fragile. I did not yet know that a marriage can survive while the person inside it quietly fades. And I did not yet know how difficult it would be to find my way back once I was gone. By the time I understood that something essential was slipping away, I had already normalized the feeling of absence. It had woven itself so neatly into my days that I mistook it for adulthood, for maturity, for the quiet price everyone paid to keep a family intact. I told myself that comfort mattered more than expression, that stability mattered more than truth. And because no disaster announced itself, because nothing visibly collapsed, I convinced myself there was nothing to confront. Life was simply becoming narrower, and I adjusted my shoulders to fit. My days began to feel rehearsed. I woke at the same hour, followed the same routes, performed the same tasks with a precision that impressed others and numbed me. At work, people relied on me. They came to me with problems, trusted my judgment, valued my calm. There, my voice carried weight. I noticed the contrast without fully acknowledging it. At home, I spoke less, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned that saying less kept things smoother. Smoothness had become my highest achievement. Amina grew more assured with each passing year. Her opinions were firm, her decisions swift. She no longer sought validation the way she once had. She spoke about herself with clarity, her needs, her goals, her boundaries. I admired that clarity, even as it highlighted my own erosion. When she spoke about feeling limited, about not wanting to be held back, I nodded instinctively. I did not ask whether I was part of what she felt restrained by. I was afraid of the answer. The children were old enough now to notice patterns, even if they could not articulate them. They came to me for calm explanations, for reassurance, for quiet support. They went to Amina for direction, for permission, for structure. We had fallen into roles so naturally that no one questioned them. I prided myself on being the steady presence, the emotional cushion. I did not realize that even cushions wear thin. Conversations between Amina and me became transactional. We discussed schedules, expenses, responsibilities. We coordinated efficiently. Rarely did we sit together without a purpose. When we did, silence filled the space quickly. Not awkward silence, practiced silence. The kind that does not ask to be broken. I learned to live inside it, even to respect it. Silence, after all, could not accuse me of saying the wrong thing. There were moments when frustration surfaced, usually from her side. She would point out my absence, my lack of initiative, my emotional distance. Each time I felt a familiar confusion. I wanted to ask how I could be distant when I had rearranged my entire life around this marriage. But I did not say that. I apologized instead. I promised to be more present, without knowing what presence meant anymore. My apologies were sincere, but they were also empty. They carried no change, only reassurance. Reassurance was what Amina seemed to want, confirmation that I would not disrupt the structure we had built. And I wanted the same thing. I did not want to risk destabilizing a life that, from the outside, appeared successful. There were nights when I sat alone after everyone had gone to sleep, scrolling through old messages on my phone, photographs from years ago. I looked at my younger self and felt a strange tenderness mixed with shame. He had been hopeful. He had believed effort could solve everything. I wanted to tell him that effort without reciprocity becomes erasure, but I did not know how to send that message backward through time. I noticed my body reacting before my mind caught up. Tension settled into my shoulders permanently. I developed headaches that arrived without warning. Sleep became shallow. Even rest felt like another task to complete. I told myself it was stress. I told myself everyone felt this way. I did not consider that my body might be responding to a life lived in constant self-restraint. Amina began traveling more frequently. Conferences, meetings, opportunities she described with excitement. I listened attentively. I handled things at home without complaint. I told myself this was partnership in action. Yet each time she left, I felt a small, quiet relief, followed by a deeper loneliness. Relief because the emotional performance could pause. Loneliness because the distance made the truth harder to ignore. When she returned from those trips, she seemed changed in subtle ways. More confident, more distant. She spoke about people I did not know, ideas I had not shared. I listened, asked questions, tried to remain connected. But I felt like an observer rather than a participant. Her world was expanding. Mine was shrinking to accommodate it. There were evenings when she would sit across from me, distracted, her attention elsewhere. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, I wanted to ask whether she still saw me, but I did not. I had learned that asking for emotional clarity often led to frustration rather than understanding. I chose predictability over vulnerability. Friends noticed changes before I admitted them to myself. They commented on how quiet I had become, how I always deferred, how I seemed tired even when I smiled. I brushed it off. I joked about responsibility, about family life. I did not want to invite questions I was not prepared to answer. Time passed the way it always does, indifferent to internal conflict. Our children grew older, more independent. The house became less noisy, more orderly. With fewer distractions, the distance between us became harder to ignore. We moved around each other with courtesy, sharing space, but not warmth. When relatives visited, we performed unity convincingly. When they left, the silence returned, thicker than before. There were nights when she came to bed later than usual. Her movements careful, deliberate, as if trying not to wake me. I pretended to sleep, listening to the rhythm of her actions, wondering where she had been, and hating myself for wondering. In the morning, everything returned to normal. Breakfast, school preparations, work, prayer. The structure of our life remained intact, and that structure protected the truth more effectively than any lie could have. I began to withdraw emotionally, not as punishment, but as self-defense. I spoke less. I shared fewer thoughts. I told myself that if I expected nothing, I could not be disappointed. She did not seem to notice, or perhaps she noticed and welcomed it. Our emotional distance allowed her to live her other life without friction. At the time, I did not know there was another life. I only knew that the one we shared felt increasingly hollow. Faith, which had once felt grounding, became complicated. During prayer, I struggled to focus. Words like truth and faithfulness echoed strangely in my mind. I wondered what God saw when we knelt together. I wondered whether sincerity mattered more than ritual. These thoughts frightened me. Questioning prayer felt like questioning the foundation of everything I had been taught to respect. And yet the questions did not leave. The moment of truth did not come through discovery, confrontation, or exposure. It came through exhaustion. One evening after prayer, she remained kneeling when I stood up. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers pressed together tightly. I could see, even from behind, that something was different. The air felt heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She asked me to sit back down. Her voice was steady, but there was an unfamiliar tension beneath it. What followed did not unfold quickly. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care, as if she were explaining something delicate rather than confessing something destructive. She told me she had been seeing someone else. Not recently, not accidentally, over time. She said it had started quietly, without intention, and grown into something she could no longer separate from her daily life. She did not cry immediately. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way one speaks when they have already accepted their own actions. I listened without interrupting, not because I was composed, but because my body refused to respond. The room felt unreal, like a place I had visited many times but never truly seen. I did not ask who he was. I did not ask how long it had lasted. Those details felt meaningless in that moment. All I could think about were the prayers, the nights, the consistency. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded distant to my own ears. I asked her how she could pray with me every night while living this double life. She looked at me then, really looked, and said something that would follow me for years. She said prayer was about her relationship with God, not about her relationship with me. She said faith and personal choices were separate things. I did not know how to respond to that. I only knew that something inside me broke quietly, without spectacle. In that moment, I understood that the woman beside me had learned how to divide her life so cleanly that even guilt had been assigned its own compartment. We sat there for a long time after she finished speaking. The house was silent. The children slept unaware. The world outside continued unchanged. Nothing dramatic happened. And yet, Everything had already ended. I did not shout. I did not strike the floor or the wall. I felt an overwhelming tiredness, deeper than physical exhaustion. A tiredness that came from realizing how long I had been alone without knowing it. That night, we slept in the same bed, separated by a distance that felt wider than any room I had ever stood in. By morning, the life I thought I knew no longer existed. By morning, the house looked exactly the same, and that sameness felt cruel. The cups were still stacked neatly. The children's shoes still waited by the door. Sunlight entered the room without hesitation, touching walls that had witnessed a truth spoken too late to matter. I woke with the strange sensation that I had survived something without understanding how. She moved through the house quietly, preparing breakfast as she always had. Her movements careful, almost respectful, as if the confession the night before had been a formal transaction now complete. We did not speak about what had been said. Words, it seemed, had finished their work. The days that followed did not bring chaos. They brought administration. Conversations about school schedules, work hours, and meals continued as if habit itself were trying to protect us from collapse. I went to work each day carrying a weight that had no visible shape. My body performed tasks automatically, lifting, walking, responding when spoken to, while my mind replayed moments I had once considered sacred. Each memory rearranged itself under this new understanding. Her prayers were no longer gentle. They were precise, controlled, practiced. And that realization unsettled me more than the image of another man ever could. At night, sleep came in fragments. I lay awake listening to sounds I had ignored for years. The shifting of the house as it cooled, distant dogs barking, her breathing beside me. I wondered if she was awake too, if guilt kept her alert, or if she slept peacefully, having already resolved whatever conflict she had felt. The thought that she might rest easily disturbed me deeply. It suggested that the pain lived only on one side of the bed. Eventually, practicality forced movement. We spoke about separation not as a dramatic decision, but as an inevitable adjustment. She said she did not want to disrupt the children's lives more than necessary. I agreed, because by then I no longer had the energy to argue about meaning. She packed her things carefully, folding clothes the same way she always had, separating them with quiet efficiency. When she left, there was no final speech, no tearful goodbye. She hugged the children and told them she would visit. Then she walked out, closing the door gently behind her, as if she were merely stepping out for an errand. The house changed immediately, not in obvious ways, but in atmosphere. Silence took on a different quality, heavier, less patient. The children sensed it too, though they did not fully understand. They asked fewer questions than I expected. Children are perceptive, but they also learn quickly what questions not to ask. I focused on routine, believing structure would protect them: meals, school, chores, bedtime. I filled the days with movement so there would be less space for reflection. Prayer disappeared without announcement. One night, after the children slept, I found myself standing in the room where we used to kneel. The mat lay folded in the corner. I realized I did not know how to pray alone anymore. The words felt unreliable. I did not doubt God, but I doubted language. I doubted rituals that could exist comfortably alongside betrayal. So I stood there for a long time, saying nothing, before turning off the light. People noticed, of course. In communities like ours, separation is never private. Relatives asked questions politely, indirectly. Neighbors offered sympathy, wrapped in curiosity. I answered with minimal detail, preserving dignity where I could. I did not speak badly of her, not because I wanted to protect her, but because speaking felt pointless. What mattered had already happened in the quiet, away from witnesses. Years passed. The children grew taller, more independent. They adjusted in ways that impressed and saddened me. I became both parents without ceremony. I learned how to braid hair poorly, how to pack lunches efficiently, how to sit through school meetings without someone beside me. Fatigue became constant, but it was a familiar fatigue, one I knew how to carry. Occasionally, she visited. Her presence felt formal, cautious. We spoke politely, exchanging necessary information. There was no attempt at reconciliation. Whatever bond we had shared no longer existed in a form that could be repaired. I sensed that she had moved on emotionally long before she left physically. In time, I accepted that. What lingered longest was not anger, but self-examination. I replayed my life slowly, asking questions I had never allowed myself to ask before. Had I been absent without realizing it? Had I mistaken endurance for love? Had my silence taught her that honesty was unnecessary? These questions did not absolve her actions, but they reshaped my understanding of responsibility. I saw how two people could fail each other quietly, without cruelty, without intention. As I aged, the urgency of pain softened into something more reflective. I began to see my marriage not as a tragedy, but as a lesson in how easily structure can replace connection, how faith can become habit, how proximity can exist without intimacy. I learned that loyalty expressed only through routine can leave emotional needs unaddressed until they seek fulfillment elsewhere. One evening, many years later, I sat alone at the same table near the window where I once listened to the clock mark time. The children were grown and living their own lives. The house was quiet in a way that felt final rather than lonely. I thought about the man I had been, earnest, hard-working, convinced that staying was the same as loving. I felt compassion for him. He had done what he knew how to do. I also thought about her. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I understood now that she had been searching for something she could not name, something she did not know how to ask for without dismantling the life we had built. Instead of speaking, she divided herself. Instead of confronting, she adapted. Her betrayal was not sudden. It was gradual, disciplined, and hidden behind consistency. I do not regret loving her. I regret not knowing how to speak. I regret believing that silence was strength and prayer was proof. Faith, I learned, is not measured by ritual, but by alignment. Truth must be present, or everything else becomes performance. Now, when night falls and the house settles, I no longer listen for footsteps or voices. I listen to my own breathing, steady and honest. I have learned to sit with myself without fear. And when I pray, quietly, imperfectly, I do so without hiding, asking not for preservation of appearances, but for the courage to live without dividing my life into compartments. That, in the end, is the truth I arrived at too late to save my marriage, but early enough to save what remained of me.